Joining me now is Massachusetts Democratic Congressman Stephen Lynch. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee and has been in the room for the closed-door depositions throughout this impeachment inquiry. Congressman, thank you very much for being here. I do want to continue talking about timing and whether you plan on getting this done before 2020. There is a lot to do, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to read off what we know so far, and you tell me if we're leaving something out. 11 other witness transcripts have yet to be released. 2 are scheduled to be released tomorrow. I guess they're going to come in pairs for the coming days. There's additional closed-door testimony scheduled. Some witnesses are ignoring that, those subpoenas. Public testimony in the House Intelligence Committee. Judiciary Committee deliberation on potential articles. December ruling on Kupperman on whether or not he has to appear before the committee. Full House vote on potential articles if it comes to that. And then, of course, it goes to the Senate. Do you think that this is going to happen before 2020?
Well, I think there's a range of possibilities, and there are some witnesses out there that are sort of on the bubble. I can think of National Security Advisor Bolton. If he agreed to come forward, I think we would make accommodations for that. But I think that Chairman Schiff has indicated several weeks. That could be a month. It could be a little bit less when we might get to public hearings. But again, the important thing is to have the evidence, to go forward with the best evidence. And I think that's really the priority. I was down there today. We expected 4 witnesses to appear today. None of them did. We've got some witnesses on for tomorrow. I think one of them might attend. And then on Wednesday, we have another witness that might attend. So that's having some bearing on the time frame. Some of it is not readily within our control. We're also looking for documents that we've requested from the State Department. We actually know what the documents say because witnesses have described those documents verbally to us, but we still want to have that chain of custody. We want to have the documents delivered by the witness to the State Department, to the Congress, to effectuate any case that goes forward.
Do you think the administration is trying to stall? And if they are, to what end?
Oh, they're definitely trying to stall. I think, and they're trying to spin, right, as this goes forward. I think they see that, the longer this goes on, sort of like the Mueller report, people kept hearing, dribs and drabs, and then in the end, it sort of fizzled because the report said there was no collusion, although it didn't dismiss the possibility of obstruction. I think the story went on too long. In this case, I think the meaningful part of this will be when we get witnesses on the stand. As was said earlier, we have a line of questioning for 45 minutes. These are very credible witnesses, many of them. Ambassador Taylor, also Lieutenant Colonel Vindman, very, very powerful testimony, and real patriots in my opinion.
Why are the transcripts only being released in pairs, and why did we get McKinley and Yovanovitch today when they were not the first witnesses?
Well, they were among the group of first witnesses, and I think they provide a context, especially Yovanovitch. I think it provides a context to what was going on with former Mayor Giuliani acting on behalf of the president. That whole the context of her threatened removal if she didn't get on board with the program to defend the president's conduct. So I think it's important to lay out the context, and the more I think impactful testimony will come later.
So are you saying you're basically building a case, an argument, by releasing the testimony in a certain order?
I believe so, yeah.
Back in April, you told the Boston Herald, the radio program of the Boston Herald, that impeachment could hurt the Democrats potentially. You said, I think if we were to go through this bruising impeachment process in the House, I think we'd have the votes, but it will go to the Senate and it will die there. I think at that point, if it is seen that the president has been exonerated, then the whole focus of the whole election period will be on impeachment rather than the merits of President Trump being elected, or we go to a new candidate. So I think it could hurt us politically for those reasons. That was back in April. Obviously, that was about the Mueller report. This is a different topic. Do you think it's different now?
I do. The difference is evidence, right? So back then, we had the Mueller report. It was inconclusive, I believe, the way it was rolled out. And we had a response from, I think, every single Republican senator that was not enough to impeach. In this case, we have the president's statement, which is pretty damning in itself. We have a lot of corroborating witnesses. We have people who were on the call. We have direct evidence. We have both testimony and documents. And then we had every single Republican senator support the idea of an impeachment inquiry, which is much different than what we had in the first instance. So,
are you expecting there to be potentially bipartisan support for impeachment, or potentially Republicans who will vote to remove him? Because as of now, the scenario still reads the same, where Republicans vote to keep him in office, and then failed removal could potentially be the #1 topic in the 2020 election.
Well, what I'm saying is that the difference here is direct evidence of the president's misconduct, his wrongdoing, his criminal activity. We did not have that before. So you're right. We could prove our case beyond a reasonable doubt to those people who are open to the facts, and yet the Republican Senate could say, you know what, we're not going to defend the Constitution. We're not going to defend the rule of law. We're going to defend the president in his misconduct. That could happen. But I think there would be consequences for those senators if they broke their oath of office and did not support and defend the Constitution.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Meet the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.